What if the perfect life was a perfect lie? For Eleanora Vance Blackwood, wife of celebrated tech billionaire Damien Blackwood, her world was a carefully constructed masterpiece of public adoration and private bliss, soon to be crowned by the arrival of their first child. Her life was a portrait of enviable success. But while she was in their Manhattan penthouse, lovingly decorating a nursery with dreams for their future, Damien was on a private jet to Lake Como. He wasn't going for business, but to marry another woman. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a woman who, pregnant and heartbroken, flew across the world to crash a wedding and demand an answer. What happens when a wife's worst nightmare unfolds in the most beautiful place on earth? Damien Blackwood was a modern-day king. His kingdom was Blackwood Innovations, a tech empire that had revolutionized renewable energy. His face, a handsome and confident mask of chiseled features and piercing blue eyes, was a regular on the covers of Forbes and Wired. To the world, he was a visionary, a philanthropist, a man who had everything. And the most prized jewel in his crown was his wife, Eleanora Vance Blackwood. Eleanora was not a conquest, she was a dynasty. The Vances were old money, their name etched into the stone facades of libraries and museums across the city. She was graceful, intelligent, with a quiet strength that seemed to anchor Damien's volatile brilliance. They had met at a charity gala, and their union was hailed as the perfect merger of New World innovation and Old World elegance. For 5 years, they were the city's golden couple. Their life was a curated masterpiece of charity balls, exclusive getaways to St. Bart's, and quiet evenings in their sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. Now at 32, Eleanora was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son. This, she believed, was the final, perfect piece of their life. She spent her days in a blissful haze of planning, choosing between bespoke cribs from Bond and hand-painted wallpaper depicting gentle safari animals. She felt a profound, bone-deep contentment, the kind that feels unshakable. The first crack in her perfect world was almost invisible. Damien, who usually worked with a frenetic, all-consuming energy, had become distant. He claimed the pressure of a new satellite launch was consuming him. His nights were spent at the office, his phone calls became hushed, and his business trips grew more frequent and longer. "It's just for a few more weeks, Elle," he'd murmur, kissing her forehead. His touch felt practiced rather than passionate. "Once Project Aries is launched, I'm all yours and his." He'd place a hand on her swollen belly, a gesture that once made her heart soar, but now felt like a performance. Eleanora, ever trusting, accepted it. She was a Vance. Vances did not indulge in baseless suspicion. They were stoic, supportive. So she smiled, packed his bags, and told herself that his success was their success. The name Isabella Rossi first appeared as a whisper. A new hire at Blackwood Innovations, a fiery Italian-Brazilian head of international marketing. Then, a photograph from a tech conference in Dubai surfaced online, Damien, laughing, with his arms slung casually around a woman of breathtaking beauty. Isabella had cascading dark hair, eyes the color of whiskey, and a smile that was both predatory and intoxicating. When Eleanora asked about her, Damien was dismissive. "Isabella? Brilliant. Absolutely ruthless in the boardroom. She's been essential for the European expansion." He said it so smoothly, so professionally, that Eleanora felt a pang of shame for her flicker of jealousy. But the distance grew into a chasm. He missed an ultrasound appointment for the first time. An emergency meeting in Zurich, his assistant had explained. He forgot their anniversary. He sent a mountain of peonies and a diamond necklace so ostentatious it felt like a bribe, a distraction. Eleanora wore the necklace, but it felt cold against her skin. The real alarm bell rang on a Tuesday morning. Damien was supposedly in Tokyo for a 48-hour whirlwind trip. Eleanora was arranging baby clothes in the nursery when her credit card alert pinged on her phone, a charge from a bespoke floral designer in Bellagio, Italy. The charge was enormous, enough to fund a small wedding. Her blood ran cold. Tokyo. Bellagio. The two places were on opposite sides of the planet. For an hour, she sat on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by the soft blues and creams of her baby's future, and let the ugly truth wash over her. This wasn't just a flicker of jealousy anymore. This was a 5-alarm fire. The Van Cess might be stoic, but they were not fools. Her father, a titan of industry himself, had always told her, "Trust your gut, Eleonora. It's the one asset that never lies." Her hands trembled as she made a call. She didn't call her friends or her mother. She called Frank Miller, a man her father had used for decades for discreet corporate and personal security. Frank was a former NYPD detective, now a private investigator with an unparalleled network and a bulldog's tenacity. "Frank, it's Eleonora Vance," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need you to find my husband." Frank, who had known Eleonora since she was a little girl, didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Give me the details. I'll be in touch." 24 hours later, the world ended. Frank's voice over the phone was grim, stripped of all pleasantries. "Eleonora, are you sitting down? Just tell me, Frank." "He's not in Tokyo. His jet, a Gulfstream G650, flew from New York to Milan 2 days ago. He's at a private residence, the Villa Cervelloni on Lake Como. He's not alone." Eleonora closed her eyes. Isabella Rossi. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Frank confirmed. "But that's not the worst of it. I have a source on the ground. They're setting up for an event, a wedding. It's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Eleonora, it's his." The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the polished marble floor. A wedding. The word was an absurdity, a grotesque parody. A man couldn't get married if he was already married. The flowers, the charge from Bellagio, it wasn't for a business associate. It was for his own wedding to his mistress. A wave of nausea and grief so profound it stole her breath washed over her. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent reminder of the life intertwined with hers, a life built on a foundation of lies. She could break. She could crumble into a million pieces right there on the floor. She could call her lawyers, her father, and let them unleash hell. But as she stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock, her hand protectively clutching her stomach, a different feeling began to surface. It started as a spark in the frozen landscape of her heart and grew into a raging fire. It was fury pure, undiluted, and clarifying. He would not do this to her. He would not erase her, erase their son, in some sun-drenched secret ceremony while she sat waiting for him at home. She was not a footnote in her own life. She was Eleonora Vance Blackwood, and she was still his wife. She stood up, her movements stiff but resolute. She walked to her closet and pulled out a suitcase. She packed methodically, not with tears, but with a terrifying calm. She booked a first-class ticket on the next flight to Milan. She called Frank back. "I need a car and a driver waiting for me at Malpensa Airport," she said, her voice like ice. "And Frank, get me an invitation to the wedding." The flight to Milan was a 7-hour descent into hell. Eleonora sat in the hushed, sterile luxury of the first-class cabin, a cashmere blanket draped over her, a glass of water untouched on the tray beside her. Outside her window, the sky bled from a bruised purple into the inky black of the Atlantic night. Each mile that passed was a mile closer to a confrontation she couldn't fully imagine, a scene so surreal it felt like something from a lurid movie. The pregnancy, once a source of gentle joy, was now a physical burden compounding her emotional agony. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and the baby seemed to sense her distress, tumbling and kicking restlessly within her. She would place a hand on her stomach, a gesture that was both protective and grounding, and whisper silently, "We're okay. We will be okay." It was a lie, but it was the only thing keeping her from screaming. She replayed their life together in her mind, searching for clues she had missed. Was it all a lie? The tender moments, the shared laughter, the promises whispered in the dark. Had he been plotting this betrayal while she was picking out names for their son? Damien, the master strategist, the man who saw every angle in a business deal, had he applied that same cold, calculating logic to the demolition of their marriage? Her mind fixated on Isabella Rossi. She had Googled the woman obsessively before leaving, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Isabella was an alpha female, a Harvard MBA with a reputation for being a shark. Her social media was a curated feed of ambition, keynote speeches in Singapore, yachting in Monaco, charity climbs up Kilimanjaro. She was everything Eleonora was not: bold, exotic, overtly sexual. Isabella was the lightning storm, Eleonora was the quiet, steady earth. Damien, it seemed, wanted to conquer both. A terrible, humiliating thought surfaced. Had he been comparing them? Had he lain in bed with Isabella, laughing about his placid, predictable wife at home, the naive pregnant woman waiting for his return? The thought was a physical blow, and she had to grip the armrests of her seat to keep from doubling over. As the plane began its descent towards Milan, a cold resolve settled over her. The hurt was still there, a vast black ocean beneath the ice. But on the surface, there was only purpose. She was not here as a victim. She was here as a consequence. A discreet driver arranged by Frank was waiting for her at Malpensa. He was a stony-faced Italian man named Marco who took her bag without a word and led her to a sleek black Maserati. He handed her a large, cream-colored envelope. "From Mr. Miller," he said, his English heavily accented. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address for the Villa Cervelloni and a simple engraved invitation: "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Damien Blackwood and Isabella Rossi." Seeing their names linked together in elegant script was a fresh stab of pain. Frank had also included a note. "Eleonora, the ceremony is at 3 p.m. on the West Terrace. Security is private, not local police. They are checking names at the gate, not photo IDs. Marco will get you through. Once you are inside, you are on your own. My advice, don't go. Let the lawyers handle it. But I know you won't listen. Be careful." He was right. She wouldn't listen. This was not for lawyers. Not yet. This was for her. The drive to Lake Como was beautiful and torturous. The scenery was achingly romantic, the Alps rising like jagged teeth against a brilliant blue sky, the water of the lake a shimmering expanse of sapphire. Cypress trees and pastel-colored villages dotted the shoreline. It was a place for lovers, a place for honeymoons. The irony was a bitter pill. Marco navigated the winding lakeside roads with an unnerving calm. "The Villa Cervelloni is very private, signora," he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Owned by an old Milanese family. They rent it for a fortune to people who do not wish to be seen. People who are committing bigamy," Eleonora thought acidly. They arrived at the gates of the villa just before 3. Two imposing men in sharp black suits stood guard, holding a guest list on a tablet. As Marco slowed the car, Eleonora's heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and adrenaline. Marco rolled down his window. "Eleonora Vance," he said, using the Italian pronunciation of her name. One of the guards scanned the list. He frowned. "I have no Eleonora Vance." Eleonora's blood turned to ice. Was this it? Would she be turned away at the gate, defeated before she even began? Marco leaned out slightly. "My apologies," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I am tired from the drive. It is under Vance. Just Vance." The guard scrolled again. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Ah, yes. Signorina Vance. Welcome." The heavy wrought iron gates swung open. Marco had gotten her in under her maiden name, a guest on a list Damien must have carelessly approved, assuming it was a distant business acquaintance of the Vances he couldn't afford to offend. The small deception felt like a victory, fanning the flames of her resolve. The villa was even more magnificent up close, a sprawling terracotta palace surrounded by acres of terraced gardens. Fountains whispered, and the air was thick with the scent of roses and jasmine. As they pulled up to the main entrance, Eleonora could hear the gentle, hopeful notes of a string quartet playing Vivaldi. Marco stopped the car. He turned to look at her, his professional demeanor finally cracking to reveal a sliver of human concern. "Signora, whatever you are about to do, I wish you luck." "Thank you, Marco," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She stepped out of the car. The sun was warm on her face. She smoothed down the simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress she had chosen, a dress Damien had once said made her eyes look like the sea at twilight. She was an apparition of class and restraint in a scene of high-stakes deception. From the west terrace, she could see a small gathering of perhaps 30 people. They were seated in white chairs facing an archway draped in thousands of white roses and peonies, her credit card charge, blooming in mockery of her. She saw the back of Damien's head. He stood under the archway, looking impossibly handsome in a bespoke Tom Ford suit. Facing him was Isabella, a vision in a sleek, modern Vera Wang gown. Her back was to the villa, her face tilted up towards Damien, adoration in every line of her body. Eleonora walked not towards the terrace, but along the stone colonnade that ran parallel to it, keeping herself in the shadows of the pillars. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She was not a whirlwind of fury. She was the calm before the storm. She reached the edge of the terrace just as the officiant, a silver-haired man with a gentle smile, began to speak. His voice drifted across the manicured lawn. A bond of love, trust, and commitment. A partnership of two souls ready to embark on a shared journey. Eleonora's hand rested on her belly. The baby was still, as if holding its breath. The officiant continued, his voice resonating with warmth. Marriage is a sacred vow, a public declaration of a private love. If there is anyone present who knows any reason why Damien Blackwood and Isabella Rossi should not be lawfully joined in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A customary silence fell over the small crowd. The string quartet held their bows ready. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the olive trees. 1 second passed. 2. 3. From the shadows of the colonnade, a voice emerged, clear and steady, cutting through the serene afternoon air like a shard of glass. "I do." Every head on the terrace swiveled as one. The music stopped. The officiant froze, his mouth slightly agape. Eleonora stepped out of the shadows and into the sunlight. She walked slowly, deliberately towards the aisle, her gaze locked on the man standing under the archway of flowers. Damien turned. His smile, the confident, charismatic smile that had charmed investors and won over the world, vaporized. His face went slack, the color draining from it until it was a waxy, horrified mask. His blue eyes, which she had once compared to a summer sky, were wide with the sheer terror of a man watching his universe implode. Isabella, confused, looked from Damien's horrified face to the woman walking towards them. She saw a beautiful, poised, and very pregnant woman. Her brow furrowed in annoyance. "Damien, who is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "What is going on?" Eleonora stopped at the front row of chairs, a few yards from them. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, a vision of betrayed love and righteous fury, her hand never leaving her stomach. She held Damien's terrified gaze and gave Isabella her answer, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an atomic bomb. "I'm his wife." The silence that followed Eleonora's words was not empty. It was a dense, physical presence, sucking the air from the terrace, pressing down on the 30 guests who sat frozen in their seats. The string quartet looked at each other in panic, bows hovering uselessly over their instruments. The officiant's face was a comical picture of bewilderment. The idyllic Italian sun seemed to dim, the scene instantly curdling into a tableau of catastrophe. Damien Blackwood, the king of his universe, looked as though he had been shot. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. His mind, usually a supercomputer processing 1,000 variables a second, had crashed. He stared at Eleonora, his elegant, pregnant wife, who was supposed to be an ocean away, safely cocooned in their life, in their lie, and saw a ghost of his own making, come to haunt the feast. It was Isabella who broke the spell. Her whiskey-colored eyes, moments ago soft with adoration, narrowed into slits of pure venom. She took a step forward, her couture gown rustling in protest. "That's not funny," she hissed, her accent thickening. "This is some kind of sick joke. Damien, get rid of her. Now." But Damien was paralyzed, his gaze still locked on Eleonora. He saw the quiet strength in her posture, the icy fire in her eyes, the undeniable swell of their child beneath her hand. There was no denying her. She was reality, crashing his fantasy wedding. Eleonora ignored Isabella completely. Her focus was a laser beam on her husband. "You left," she said, her voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "You left to go to Tokyo. That's what you told me, Damien. You kissed my forehead and you told me you were going to Tokyo." Each word was a precise, calculated strike. She was not just accusing him, she was narrating his betrayal for the assembled audience. In the front row, a man Eleonora vaguely recognized as Alastair Sterling, Damien's longtime business partner and best man, slowly lowered his face into his hands. He knew, of course. He knew about the affair. But the pregnancy, judging by the shock on his face, this was new information. Isabella finally turned on Damien, her beautiful face contorting into a mask of fury and confusion. "Wife. Damien, what is she talking about? You told me the divorce was finalized 6 months ago. You showed me the papers." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that a strangled laugh escaped Eleonora's throat. "Divorce papers? He showed you divorce papers?" She took a step closer, her presence radiating a power that made everyone else, including the fiery Isabella, seem small. "There are no divorce papers. There is no divorce. There is a marriage, our marriage, and there is a child. Our child." She emphasized the word, her hand pressing firmly against her stomach. The collective gasp from the guests was audible. Pregnant. The woman was pregnant. The scene had just escalated from a scandalous interruption to a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Isabella recoiled as if she had been slapped. She stared at Eleonora's belly, then back at Damien's ashen face. The truth, in all its horrific glory, dawned on her. She hadn't been the triumphant bride securing the billionaire. She had been the other woman, a pawn in a disgusting, elaborate deception, made a fool of in front of his closest friends. "You bastard," she whispered, her voice shaking. She turned to Damien, her love and adoration curdling into pure hatred. "You lying, pathetic bastard." Her hand flew, and the sharp crack of her palm connecting with Damien's cheek echoed across the terrace. Damien barely flinched, his eyes still fixed on Eleonora, the architect of his ruin. The scene dissolved into chaos. Guests, mortified and desperate to escape the toxic fallout, began to rise from their seats, murmuring excuses and avoiding eye contact. Alastair Sterling was the first to act, moving swiftly to Damien's side. "Get everyone out of here," he muttered to the security guards. "Now. Event's over." Damien finally found his voice, a desperate, broken rasp. "Eleonora, please. Not here. We can talk about this." "Talk." Eleonora's laugh was brittle, devoid of humor. "The time for talking was before you boarded a private jet to marry your mistress while your pregnant wife was at home. The time for talking is over. Now is the time for listening." She held up her left hand, the flawless 8-carat diamond on her ring finger catching the light. "This is a marriage license from the state of New York. It is valid. This," she said, gesturing to the elaborate floral arch, "is a farce. It's not just immoral, Damien. It's illegal. I believe the word is bigamy. The legal term, dropped with such precision, hung in the air like poison gas. Damien flinched as if she had struck him. This was no longer just a messy domestic dispute, it was a potential crime. Isabella, her face streaked with tears of mascara and rage, rounded on him again. You were never going to leave her. The sick wife. The amicable separation. It was all lies. Sick wife. Eleonora's eyes narrowed. Is that what he told you I was? Terminally ill, perhaps. Was my death supposed to be a convenient footnote in your love story? The cruelty of it, the sheer psychopathic level of his deception, was staggering. He hadn't just cheated. He had tried to erase her, writing her out of his life with a fabricated narrative of divorce and illness. As the last of the horrified guests were ushered away, leaving only the wreckage of the wedding party, Alistair stepped between them, playing the reluctant peacekeeper. Damien, this is a catastrophe. You need to handle this. Isabella, maybe you should go inside. I'm not going anywhere. Isabella shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Eleonora. She has ruined my life. I ruined your life. Eleonora's voice was dangerously calm. You helped my husband build a fantasy on the ashes of my trust. You are not a victim here. You are his co-conspirator. Damien finally moved, taking a step towards Eleonora, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Please, let's go somewhere private. We can sort this out. I can explain. Explain what? She shot back, her voice rising for the first time. Explain how you looked me in the eye, touched my stomach, and talked about our son's future, all while you were planning this sham. There is no explanation for that. There is only the truth. And the truth is, you are a monster. She turned her back on him, a gesture of finality that was more powerful than any slap. She looked at Alistair, her expression cold and appraising. You were his best man, Alistair. You stood up there with him. Did you know he was still married? Did you know I was pregnant? Alistair had the decency to look ashamed. I knew about Isabella, he admitted, his voice low. I didn't agree with it. But I didn't know about the baby, Eleonora. I swear to God. Or that he was still. I thought the divorce was real. He lied to all of us. Eleonora gave a single, sharp nod. The lines were drawn. She turned back to Damien. He looked utterly broken, a fallen king amidst the ruins of his own making. The power, the charisma, the confidence had all been stripped away, leaving only a weak, pathetic man. I didn't fly across the world to stop a wedding, Damien, she said, her voice dropping back to that icy, controlled tone. A wedding between you and her is a legal fiction. It means nothing. I came here to make sure you saw my face. I came here so you would understand that I know everything. She let that hang in the air for a moment. Then she delivered the killing blow. My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday morning. I believe you'll want to reread Clause 17b of our prenuptial agreement. The infidelity clause. It's quite specific. And I imagine the penalties for attempting bigamy will make it even more interesting. With that, she turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She walked with the unshakable dignity of a queen abdicating a corrupt throne, leaving the three of them, the liar, the mistress, and the complicit friend, standing in the wreckage of the beautiful, sunny afternoon. Marco was waiting with the car door open. She got in, and as the Maserati pulled away down the gravel drive, she finally allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The war had just begun. The story did not leak. It exploded. By the time Eleonora's plane touched down at JFK, the shockwave from Lake Como had already hit the shores of Manhattan. It wasn't a gossip columnist who broke the story, it was a furious Isabella Rossi. Humiliated and incandescent with rage, she had done the one thing Damien would fear most, she had gone public. Not to the tabloids, but to the Financial Times. She hadn't just painted a picture of a scorned woman, she had painted a picture of a dangerously unstable and deceitful CEO. She gave them everything, the lies about the divorce, the fabricated story of the sick wife, the timeline of his deception. She framed it not as a personal betrayal, but as a fatal character flaw, questioning the judgment of a man who would risk his entire empire on such a reckless, sociopathic gamble. The implication was clear: if he could lie so pathologically in his personal life, what was he lying about in his business? The headline was brutal: Blackwood's billion-dollar bigamy, tech titan's secret wedding crashed by pregnant wife, raising questions of corporate governance. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. When the markets opened in New York on Monday morning, Blackwood Innovations stock, ticker symbol, BWI, plummeted. It fell 15% in the first hour of trading, wiping out over $10 billion of market value. The board of directors, a collection of stony-faced venture capitalists and industry veterans who had once worshipped Damien, convened an emergency meeting. Damien, who had flown back in a state of shell-shocked panic, was summoned not to his gleaming corner office, but to a sterile, windowless boardroom. The atmosphere was glacial. Alistair Sterling was there, his face grim. The rest of the board members looked at Damien not as their visionary leader, but as a liability, a toxic asset that needed to be contained. "What the hell were you thinking, Damien?" demanded Marcus Thorne, the lead independent director, a man whose folksy demeanor masked a mind like a steel trap. "It was a personal matter," Damien stammered, his usual confidence completely gone. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. "Personal?" Thorne scoffed, slamming a copy of the Financial Times onto the table. $10 billion in vaporized shareholder value is not personal. Attempting to illegally marry an employee while lying to your board, your partners, and your wife is not personal. It speaks to a level of recklessness that we cannot tolerate. Damien was adrift in a storm of his own creation. He had always been able to control the narrative, to spin any situation to his advantage. But here, there was no spin. There was only the ugly, undeniable truth. Meanwhile, Eleonora was moving with a speed and precision that would have made her father proud. She was no longer just the grieving wife, she was the CEO of her own survival. She had checked into a suite at the Carlisle Hotel under her maiden name, refusing to return to the penthouse that now felt like a crime scene. Her first call had been to her father, who listened to the entire sordid tale in grim silence. Her second call was to the most feared divorce attorney in New York, an elegant, silver-haired shark named Catherine Grant. Catherine's specialty was high-stakes, high-asset divorces, particularly those involving complex corporate structures and well-hidden funds. They met in Eleonora's suite. Catherine listened intently as Eleonora recounted the events, her expression unreadable. When Eleonora finished, Catherine gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good," she said, her voice crisp. "You didn't scream. You didn't throw things. You stated facts, established your legal standing, and left. That was perfect. You gave him nothing to use against you and everything for us to use against him." Catherine looked over the prenuptial agreement, her perfectly manicured finger tapping on Clause 17b. "This is an ironclad infidelity clause," she mused. It was well drafted. In the event of proven adultery, you are entitled to a 50% stake in all assets acquired during the marriage. That includes the appreciation of his BWI stock. Eleonora's eyes widened. That was billions. "But we're not just going to invoke this clause," Catherine continued, a predatory gleam in her eye. "His actions in Como, the attempted bigamy, constitute extreme emotional distress. And his lie about you being terminally ill, a jury would be horrified. We are not just filing for divorce, Eleonora. We are going on the offensive." Catherine's plan was audacious. They wouldn't just be targeting Damien's personal wealth. They would petition the court to freeze his assets pending a forensic accounting of Blackwood Innovations itself. A man who uses company resources for a trip to illegally marry his mistress, Catherine explained, is a man who likely has a loose definition of what constitutes a business expense. I'd be willing to bet he's been funding his entire affair with shareholder money, private jets, apartments, gifts. If we can prove that, we can argue that he has devalued the very company you are entitled to half of. The board will have no choice but to push him out. While Eleonora was strategizing, Damien was crumbling. His attempts to reach her were met with a wall of silence. His calls went to a disconnected number. His texts were left unread. The only communication he received was a terse, formal email from Catherine Grant's office informing him of the impending legal action. He was isolated. Alastair, his oldest friend, was keeping a professional distance, his conversations clipped and formal. The board is considering placing you on an immediate leave of absence, he'd said, avoiding Damien's gaze. The optics are untenable. Then came the second dagger, not from Eleonora or the board, but from the woman he had tried to marry. Isabella Rossi, having been unceremoniously fired and stripped of her stock options, wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. She contacted a rival tech conglomerate, a company run by the notoriously aggressive billionaire Mason Ives, a man who had been trying to find a chink in Blackwood Innovations' armor for years. Isabella, as the head of international marketing, had been privy to the strategy and launch details for Project Ares, the revolutionary satellite network that was supposed to be Damien's magnum opus. She sold them everything, the launch timelines, the proprietary technology she had access to, the key marketing strategies, the vulnerabilities in their system. It was corporate espionage of the highest order, an act of pure vengeance. The news broke a week after the Como incident. Mason Ives's company announced they were fast-tracking a competing project, one that bore a startling resemblance to Project Ares but with a launch date 3 months earlier. The market reacted with brutal finality. BWI stock, which had stabilized at a lower value, nosedived again. Analysts declared Project Ares, Damien's great legacy, effectively dead in the water. The board no longer had a choice. Damien Blackwood was officially suspended as CEO of the company he had built from nothing. He was locked out of the building, his access codes deactivated. He stood on the sidewalk outside his gleaming glass tower, a king exiled from his own kingdom, watching the ticker tape display real-time stock prices that chronicled his spectacular demise. He was alone, staring at the ruins of his life. He had lost his company, his reputation, and his friends. He had been outmaneuvered by his mistress, and the woman he had truly betrayed, the one person who had been his anchor, was now methodically and brilliantly dismantling what was left of his world, preparing for a war he had already lost. He finally understood. Eleonora wasn't just his wife. She had been his conscience, his stability, his true north. And he, in his arrogance, had thrown it all away for a fleeting, beautiful lie on the shores of Lake Como. 2 months passed, each day a slow, grinding turn of the legal wheel. The autumn chill settled over New York City, but the war between the Blackwoods only intensified. Eleonora, now heavily pregnant, commanded her campaign from the quiet, opulent fortress of her suite at the Carlisle. The grief had not vanished, it had been transmuted into fuel. It powered her through long meetings with Catherine Grant, through endless affidavits, and through nights where sleep offered no escape from the phantom limb of her old life. Her son was a constant, powerful presence. His kicks and rolls were a reminder that this was not just about retribution, it was about building a future, a safe and stable world for the life she carried. She had chosen a name for him, Theodore. It meant, gift of God, and it felt right. He was the one pure thing to come from the wreckage. Catherine Grant's legal team, armed with the court order to freeze Damien's assets, had descended upon Blackwood Innovations' finances like a pack of wolves. What they were finding was even worse than they had imagined. Damien hadn't just funded a few trysts, he had treated the corporate treasury as his personal piggy bank. There was a secret apartment in Knightsbridge, a leased Aston Martin in Isabella's name, and a river of black Amex charges that flowed through shell accounts labeled discretionary R&D. The key that unlocked it all, however, came from an unexpected source. Alastair Sterling, now serving as the beleaguered interim CEO of BWI, was faced with a choice: go down with the sinking ship of his friend's loyalty or save the company he had helped build. One evening, a courier delivered an unmarked package to Catherine Grant's office. Inside was a hard drive. It contained Damien's unedited expense reports and a shadow ledger detailing every dollar siphoned off to fund his double life. There was no note. None was needed. While Eleonora was building her case, Damien was living in his own personal hell. His exile was absolute. He had moved into a stark, minimalist condo in Tribeca, a place with white walls and no memories. The silence was deafening. He, a man who thrived on noise, on action, on the constant adulation of others, was now utterly alone. He watched his life being dissected on cable news. He saw paparazzi photos of Eleonora, her hand always resting protectively on her stomach, and the sight was a physical pain, a constant reminder of the family he had destroyed. The arrogance that had been his armor was gone, stripped away layer by layer during depositions where Catherine Grant's lawyers flayed him with his own lies. He was no longer a king. He was a fool. And he was beginning to understand that the empire he'd lost was nothing compared to the wife and son he had thrown away. Desperation became his new companion. He had to talk to her, not through lawyers, not through emails, but face to face. He needed to see her, to make her understand that the man who had stood on that terrace in Como was not the man he was now. He was a broken thing. And in that brokenness, he had found a sliver of the truth. He still had one loyalist left, a young, starstruck former assistant who felt a pang of pity for her fallen boss. A single text message gave him the information he needed: the address of Eleonora's obstetrician on the Upper East Side and the time of her final weekly appointment. He waited for her across the street, huddled in the collar of his coat, a ghost haunting the edges of her new life. When she emerged from the building, she looked radiant and formidable. The pregnancy had softened her features but sharpened her gaze. She was a woman who knew her own strength. Seeing her stole the air from his lungs. He crossed the street, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Eleonora," he called out, his voice hoarse. She stopped dead. Her security guard, a large man Frank Miller had assigned to her, immediately stepped forward, but Eleonora held up a hand, stopping him. She turned slowly, her face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "Damien," she said, her voice cold. "You shouldn't be here." He looked terrible, and he knew it. He was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had lost weight. The power suit was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. "I know. I had to see you." He took a hesitant step closer. "Everything they say is true. Everything you think I am, it's true. I was arrogant, and weak, and a coward. There's no excuse. There's nothing I can say to fix what I broke." His voice cracked. "But I see you in the papers. I see him," he gestured vaguely toward her stomach. "And I realize that I didn't just lose my company or my money. I lost everything that ever mattered. I lost my whole world, Elle. I lost you." Tears were streaming down his face now, hot tears of shame and regret. "I'll sign whatever Catherine wants. The 50%, 70%, all of it. Take the company, take the houses, take it all. I don't care about any of it anymore. But please don't take him away from me. Don't erase me from our son's life. He deserves a father, even one as pathetic as me." Eleonora listened, her stony expression unwavering. But inside, a war was raging. Her mind, conditioned by Catherine's counsel, screamed at her to walk away, to say nothing. But her heart, the foolish, traitorous heart that had loved this man, ached at the sight of his complete and utter unraveling. This was the man she had married, stripped bare of all the pride and ego that had poisoned him. She looked away from him, down at the bustling Manhattan sidewalk, trying to find her anchor. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction, Damien," she said softly. It isn't something you can buy by signing a settlement. She turned to leave, to get into the waiting car and escape the raw, painful honesty of the moment. But as she took a step, a searing, electric pain shot through her lower back. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her hand flew to her stomach, which had suddenly tightened into a hard, unyielding knot. She stumbled, leaning against the cold brick of the building for support. Damien rushed forward, his own grief forgotten in a surge of panic. "Eleonora, what is it? What's wrong?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide, the mask of composure finally shattered. In her gaze, he saw not anger, but a dawning, terrified realization. "Damien," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's time." For a frozen moment on the chaotic Upper East Side sidewalk, the world dissolved. The legal war, the billions of dollars, the public humiliation, it all evaporated in the face of a reality far more visceral and terrifying. All that existed was Eleonora, her face pale and etched with pain, and Damien, his carefully rehearsed apology forgotten in a tidal wave of primal fear. The security guard, Russo, was the first to snap into action. "I've got her. The hospital is 10 blocks away," he said, his voice a professional calm in the storm, already speaking into his wrist communicator to the driver. But Damien moved faster. The broken, pleading man of a moment ago was gone, replaced by a surge of pure, instinctual purpose. He pushed past Russo, his hands finding Eleonora's arms, steadying her as another contraction seized her. "I'm going with you," he stated, not as a request, but as an undeniable fact. Russo hesitated, his training warring with the raw humanity of the scene. He looked at Eleonora, who, through a gasp of pain, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the permission Damien needed. He half-lifted, half-guided her into the waiting town car, ignoring the shouts of a bystander who had recognized them and was now fumbling for a phone. Damien slid in beside her, his body shielding hers from the outside world. He barked the name of the hospital at the driver, his old command and control persona resurfacing not from arrogance, but from sheer necessity. The car ride was an eternity compressed into 10 minutes. The plush leather interior, once a symbol of their untouchable status, became a pressure cooker of pain and memory. Eleonora leaned her head back, her eyes squeezed shut, her breath coming in ragged pants. Without thinking, Damien took her hand, his fingers, which had signed the checks for another woman's apartment, now interlaced with hers, which were clenched white-knuckled against the pane. She didn't pull away. In that shared space of agony and anticipation, there was no room for anything but the present. "Breathe, Elle," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Just breathe with me." He began to count, the rhythmic sound of his voice a strange anchor in the swirling chaos of her senses. It was a phantom echo of a life they were supposed to have had, of Lama's classes they had never taken, of a partnership he had shattered. Yet in this moment, it was all she had. They arrived at the private entrance of Lenox Hill Hospital to a scene of escalating chaos. The bystanders' tip had spread like wildfire. A handful of paparazzi were already there, their cameras flashing like strobe lights, turning the intimate crisis into a public spectacle. Damien was out of the car before it fully stopped. He threw open Eleonora's door and, with a ferocity that stunned the photographers into a moment's hesitation, he created a human shield. He wrapped one arm around Eleonora, his coat enveloping her, and pressed her face into his shoulder to protect her from the blinding lights. "Get back," he roared, his voice booming with a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. Hospital orderlies rushed out with a wheelchair, and in a flurry of motion, they were inside, the doors swinging shut, muffling the sounds of the shouting press. The clinical, antiseptic smell of the hospital replaced the city air. The truce held in the delivery suite. Nurses bustled around, their voices calm and reassuring, but their eyes held a flicker of recognition. They knew exactly who this couple was. Damien refused to leave her side, answering medical questions, holding a cup of water to her lips, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. He was no longer the disgraced CEO or the cheating husband. He was simply the father of the child who was fighting its way into the world. Catherine Grant arrived an hour later, a severe figure in a tailored suit, her presence a stark reminder of the world outside the delivery room. She took one look at the senior Eleonora in the bed, and at Damien, his hand resting on Eleonora's shoulder and her lips thinned. "Eleonora," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Do you want him here?" Before Eleonora could answer, another contraction, stronger than the last, tore a cry from her throat. Damien's hand tightened on hers. He looked at Catherine, his eyes filled not with defiance, but with a plea. "Please," he said. "Not now." Catherine, the fearsome legal warrior, was silenced by the raw, primal power of the moment. She gave a curt nod and retreated to a corner of the room, a silent, watchful hawk. The battle could wait. Hours bled into one another. The world shrank to the four walls of the room, to the rhythmic beep of the fetal heart monitor. Damien never wavered. He held her, coached her, absorbed her cries and her pain. He saw past the woman who was suing him for half his fortune and saw only his the woman he had loved, the woman he had failed so profoundly. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was his penance. Not the loss of his company, but this, bearing witness to her strength, a strength he had nearly destroyed. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to soften the New York skyline, it happened. With one final, monumental effort from Eleonora, their son was born. A raw, healthy cry filled the room, cutting through the exhaustion and the tension. It was the sound of a new beginning. The doctor placed the baby on Eleonora's chest. He was perfect, a tiny, wrinkled, red-faced creature with a thatch of dark hair just like Damien's. Eleonora wept, tears of pain, relief, and overwhelming love streaming down her face. She looked at her son, and for the first time in months, a genuine, unguarded smile lit up her features. Damien stared, his breath caught in his chest. He looked at this tiny new life, his son, and the last of his defenses crumbled. The scale of his failure, of what he had almost lost forever, hit him with the force of a physical blow. The regret was so immense, it was suffocating. The nurses cleaned the baby and handed him, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, to Damien. He held his son, Theodore Blackwood, and his entire universe shifted. This tiny, fragile being was his responsibility. His legacy wasn't a company or a stock price. It was this child. After the doctors and nurses had left and Catherine had quietly excused herself with a meaningful glance at Eleonora, they were alone. The three of them, a broken family in a sterile hospital room, bound together by the most powerful force in the universe. Damien stood by the bed, gently rocking the baby. He looked at Eleonora, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but clear and focused. The silence was thick with unspoken words. "He's beautiful, Damien whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she said softly, her gaze fixed on her son. "He is." The war was not over. Trust was not restored. Forgiveness had not been granted. But on that quiet morning, as the city awoke outside, a temporary ceasefire was called. In the face of the profound, miraculous reality of their child, the two warring parties had laid down their arms. The battlefield had changed, and neither of them knew what the new terms of engagement would be. All they knew was that they were no longer just a husband and a wife. They were a father and a mother, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Central Park. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the rustle of golden leaves. At the center of a small, happy gathering, a little boy with a thatch of dark hair and his mother's determined eyes blew out 3 candles on a superhero-themed cake. "Happy birthday, Theo," everyone cheered. Eleonora Vance, no longer a Blackwood in name but forever a mother, beamed at her son. The divorce had been finalized 2 years ago. It was bruising, but fair. Eleonora, with the full backing of the Vance family and the evidence Alastair had provided, had become the majority shareholder of Blackwood Innovations. As chairwoman of the board, she had ousted the last of Damien's old guard, rebuilt the company's reputation on a foundation of transparency, and steered its focus toward sustainable, ethical technology. She had also launched the Vance Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers and their children. She had not just survived, she had triumphed. A man approached the picnic blanket, holding a slightly clumsy, hand-wrapped present. It was Damien. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He no longer ran the company, he headed a small, independent R&D lab funded by the foundation, working on the pure innovation he once loved, free from the pressures of the stock market. "Hey, champ," he said, kneeling to be eye level with his son. "I think you're going to like this one." Theo squealed with delight and tore into the paper. Damien looked up at Eleonora, a flicker of the old pain and a universe of regret still in his eyes. "He's amazing, Elle. You've done an incredible job." "We've done an incredible job," she corrected him, her voice soft but firm. It was an acknowledgement of his weekly visits, his unwavering presence at every scraped knee and school play, his slow, painful journey to becoming the father Theo deserved. The war had ended not with a final, decisive victory, but with the quiet, negotiated peace of co-parenting. The love they once shared was gone, a ghost that sometimes walked between them, but it had been replaced by something else, a deep, abiding respect and a shared, unconditional love for their son. As Theo laughed, showing off his new toy to his father, Eleonora watched them. The perfect life she had once dreamed of had been a lie, but the real, complicated, and beautiful life she had built from its ashes was the truth. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged into someone stronger, a woman who had learned that true power wasn't about wealth or status. It was about integrity, resilience, and the courage to reclaim your life, even when your heart is breaking. And in the warm afternoon light, surrounded by the joy of her son, Eleonora Vance was finally, truly, at peace. What did you think of Eleonora's incredible strength and her journey to a new beginning? Let me know in the comments below if you were moved by this story of drama, betrayal, and ultimate empowerment. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible real-life dramas. Thanks for listening.